Hey y'all, my name is Jen and welcome to my channel Ifers Inklings. Today's video is all about the books that I read in January, so it will be my January wrap-up video. We're going to do things a little bit differently than what I've done in the past, so stick around to see what books I read in the month of January and what I thought about them. Okay guys, so you know that my goal for 2020 is to complete the Book Riot Read Harder Challenge, complete the Pop Sugar 2020 Reading Challenge, and to read the books on my shelves, which are these back here. And that I also want to read some more of my Kindle First books because I've been collecting them and not reading them, apparently. So in January, I made a TBR video, and we're going to talk about the books on my TBR, see how well I did I read them, did I not? And then we're also going to track some of my other reading goals that go along with the books that I'm reading. So I watched Emma over at Drinking by My Shelf does this thing that she calls balancing the books. When she first started it a few years ago, it had this challenge and games, and it was a game and she had to do a certain thing to win a certain prize. But since then, she just balances her books because she's trying to read the books on her shelves and all that. She has done an amazing job, and she only has 38 TBR books, so I'm super impressed. So what she does is she takes all the books that she's read, and if it comes off of her TBR shelf, she gets a point for it. If, you know, she counts hauls and talks about those books that she's brought in, and she talks about books that she's brought in, read, and so they come on and off of her TBR all at one time. I'm not really going to do that much because I'm not balancing my books so much, but just trying to reduce this, and my goal is to read 50 books off of my TBR this year, or more, obviously more, but that's going to work out to about 4 to 5 books a month off of my TBR shelf, and which that corresponds greatly with the Pop Sugar Challenge because I need to read 4 to 5 books a month for it, and then of course with Book Riot I also need to read 2 books a month for it because it's 24 books. So anyway, we're going to go over all of that, and we're going to talk about the books that I read. So I will link Emma's channel down below. Go check her out. She's amazing. I love her. I've been following her for years, and she's one of those booktubers that I watch almost every video she posts. So. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the books that were on my January TBR and if I read them or not. Anyway, the first book was my Kindle First book, The Overdue Life of Amy Byler. It was a April of 2019 book. I have not finished reading that. I am 10% in. I'm slowly reading it. I typically only read my Kindle at night in bed, and I've been playing on TikTok instead of reading, so not doing very well there. So the next book was my book club book. So Breakfast with Buddha by Roland Morello was my book club book for the month of January, and it was read. I did read it. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. This book follows a man who is early 40s, I want to say, married, has 2 kids, doing well in life. He's a food book editor, and his parents die in a car crash together unexpectedly. They live in the Dakotas, North Dakota or South Dakota, I can't remember which one, and they have to take care, him and his sister have to go and take care of the family farm, and decide what to do with the family farm, their inheritance. Sister lives in New Jersey. She is, as he describes her, kind of a fruitcake. She's very much into tarot and this new life, and hooks up with men that are usually users and abusers, kind of thing. Not real stable, flighty, whatever. So he goes and they decide to go on a road trip. He's going to pick her up, and they're going to drive over to home, deal with that stuff, bring back what they want to keep, and then sell off the family farm and split the difference. So he gets there to pick up his sister, and she's like, I'm not going, but you're going to take Rinpoche. The Rinpoche, I can't say it. He takes this spiritual leader or advisor with him, and that's what she says. You're going to take him with you, and he's like, no, I'm not. This is no, we're not doing this. So long story short, he does end up taking this spiritual person with him, and I just can't say the word. It's a Rinpoche. Anyway, he takes him with him on this road trip, and he's like, well, I'm just going to show him America, and along the way. Well, they end up learning from each other along the way, and it is an interesting trip from across the country, where he kind of learns about himself, and that sometimes in life you have to just kind of take a back seat and figure out what's important to you and refocus yourself. It's called Breakfast with Buddha because it's a very Buddhist mindset, although this doesn't really exclude one religion or the other, or say that this is a Buddhism or that the other religions or no religion is invalid, or so I enjoyed it. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. It was just kind of a cute meandering story down the road, and it just kind of reinforced with me things that I already tried to practice anyway, and that's just being more mindful of myself, more mindful of others. Try to not necessarily go with the flow, but not get kind of so caught up in the rat race, and not to forget what's important, and to not forget to take care of myself either. So like I said, I enjoyed it. It was okay. It wasn't anything just mind-blowing spectacular. I didn't see many problems with, there wasn't anything that stood out in here or anything, but it is the first book in a series though, so keep that in mind if you decide to pick it up. I probably will not continue on and read the others. It just wasn't all that for me. So anyway, that's it. The next book that was on my TBR is Refugee by Alan Gratz. This book follows 3 different refugees. One from Germany. He's a Jewish child, and he is obviously fleeing Germany and the Holocaust. The other one is a girl from Cuba in the early 90s, and obviously they're fleeing Cuba and the Castro and his regime. And then the final one we follow is Muhammad, and he is a Syrian boy in the early 2000s, and clearly he's fleeing Syria because we're bombing the shit out of him. So this was a really great book. It's a young adult book. I think it's won some awards, but it was really told very well. Like, I could picture the struggles that each one of them were having, and what they were facing, and being a person who I grew up during the refugees fleeing Cuba into southern Florida, and then obviously the Syrian thing. I was a young adult during that time, so the only one that I didn't have personal knowledge as far as what our news coverage is the Holocaust. And of course, I'm an avid reader about the Holocaust anyway, so I know a lot of those stories, but these were so explicit, and they were told from the points of view of these children, and how they were moving along and coming along, and the impact of the adults around them. And their stories do end up interconnecting, with the exception of the Syrian boy, I believe. Nope, his does too. I do remember that. So all 3 of these end up becoming connected to each other, and it is very impactful. Even though one took place in the 1930s, the other one took place in 1994, and then the final one took place in the 2000s, having them all come together It's full circle, is all I can say. And 5 stars. I don't know what else to say about it. So go read it. Like I said, it's young adult. It does follow refugees from those 3 different time periods and struggles. And it also kind of points out what kind of crappy people Americans are. I'm just going to say it. It's awful. Even though for some of them that we were helping the refugees in the 1990s, we still weren't that great. We could have done more. Anyway, 5 stars. The next item on my TBR was this book, Imagine Wanting Only This, by Radke's. Her last name is Radke. Kristen Radke. I've started it. I am 26 pages in. So I just haven't had a lot of time to sit down and read. This month it's been kind of crazy, so the books that I had to actually physically read, I had a hard time getting to, and in fact I don't think I finished any of them. So I listened to all of these on audio. So with that said, I still have this one that I will be reading. The next book on my TBR is this massive bad boy, and that is Dune by Frank Herbert. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. I listened to it on audio, the audio production is a full cast, and there's sound effects and stuff, and it's pretty cool. But I was bored to tears through a good chunk of this. Look how big it is. Look. And I know this one's kind of thin, but it is still, I mean, this one was like 800 pages. It is a thick boy, and I just didn't care. This is a sci-fi, first book in a sci-fi fantasy novel. It follows a boy who is to be the next, I don't know what he was called. I can't even remember. But he's like destroyer of the world that they know it, and savior of one planet, group of people, civilization. And I just don't care. And I didn't care. And I know people love this book. It was okay. 3 stars. It could have been half of the amount of this, and it would have been probably more interesting, or I just felt it took forever. So that's all I'm going to say about this. I didn't care about the characters that much. I didn't really care about the storyline. I didn't care. It was well written, though. I mean, the world was built well. I could see the world. World building was good. The concept of it seemed to be right. I didn't have a hard time with that. I just didn't care. 3 stars. It was just okay. The next book on my TBR was Language of Thorns, and by Leigh Bardugo. I never got around to it, so it's still on my TBR. Hopefully you'll see a wrap up with this that includes this next month. Then I also had #Murder Trending by Gretchen McNeil. Also, I didn't get to this one because my life is crazy right now, so I will follow up with that at some point in another wrap up, because I still do plan to read it. And then the final book that was on my TBR for the month was If by Nicholas Bourbaki. Y'all, this is a choose your own adventure novel, and I went through and I chose my adventure, and the trigger warning here, not even trigger warning, but just why is this language being used warning. This book was written in 2014. At least this edition, the paperback edition, came out in 2014. On page 2 and page 3, right here, I've marked 2 words. They use the R word, referring to someone of low intelligence. And they use the F word for the slur for someone that is homosexual. They do that twice in the first chapter of this book. In the first 3 pages of this book, those 2 words were used twice. I went through the first thing. I highlighted it. I don't know if you can see this. You know, you get 2 choices at the end of the chapter. I highlighted the one that I did, and I moved on. And I did that through until I finished it. And let me just say that I absolutely hated this fucking character. The main character in here. I chose the less asshole-ish character options, and he was still an asshole. I mean, I was so angry. I was so disappointed. I thought about DNFing it I don't know how many times, but because it's a choose your own adventure, I thought I've got to be coming to the end of this at some point, right? Right? I finally did. I gave it 2 stars. I hated it. Hated it. I may go back and see if I chose something different how it would look. I don't know, but the main character is just a shitty person no matter how you slice it. No matter if you're making the good decision of the two or the better of the two, he still ends up being a shitty person, and it pissed me off. And why would you want to read that? Let's talk about the books that I read that weren't on my TBR for January. And then we will do the wrap up of where they all fit down into the stuff. So I read or listened to Runaway Vampire by Lindsay Sands. This was actually a book that I was almost done with it. I had like an hour left going into January. I didn't finish it. I always count my books read on the day that I finished the book. So I gave this one 3 stars. It is number, I don't know, 20 something of this Argonaut series by Lindsay Sands. It's a vampire paranormal romance, and that's really all you need to know about it. They're not great. They're not awful. They're a nice, fluffy paranormal romance read. And this is book 20 something. I think 26, honestly. So that's it. Then I read a book that I've got a special project for that is on a secret TBR that we're not going to talk about. But I gave it 5 stars. And you'll eventually hear about that one. Then I finally got to listen to Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did start reading this at some point last year, and I got to page 59, and I loved it, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff highlighted at that. But I was told to listen to the audiobook of this, that it was even better as an audiobook, and it's a 5-star read for me. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid. She is an auto-buy author. I've loved everything I've read by her, and I don't see that changing. This book follows a band and then another singer. Daisy Jones is a single female artist, and then the Six was a band, and that they kind of did a collab together. It's based in like the 70s, and it's told in the form of interviews. There's a twist at the end that I found to be wonderfully done. Probably not something new, but I really enjoyed it and was a little bit surprised by it. But I loved everything about this book. Loved everything about it. 5 stars. Highly recommend. And the audiobook of this was wonderful. I thought it was easy to read, and I was really thoroughly enjoying the reading experience of it as well. But the audiobook, I'm happy to say, really was phenomenal as well. The next book that I read was Buttermilk Graffiti by Edward Lee. I gave this one 5 stars. It is a memoir book based off of traveling around, visiting different food establishments around the United States. And kind of, it gives background history on them, on the town, on the people, how they came to the United States and brought their cuisine, and how their cuisine has changed over from the native cooking to what we have here in America. So I've really found it interesting. I found it fascinating, and I was just enthralled with it the whole time. So if that's something that you are interested in, if it's a nonfiction book, or if you're interested in learning about the food and cultural aspects surrounding food of different regions and different pockets of people in the United States, different nationalities, then I highly recommend this book. It was really fun, easy to listen to. I listened to the audiobook of it, but it would have also read very well or easily as well. So the next book was also another audiobook, and it was also a nonfiction book. It was All That Remains, A Life in Death by Sue Black, and this is a nonfiction book. I think it's probably considered a memoir also, because it focuses on part of Sue Black's life involving her job, but it talks about cadavers and how we can learn so much from cadavers. And let me tell you, I absolutely 100% want to donate my body to science at this point, because it was fascinating, and the way she talked about it and the things that they learn, and how it's so much easier to learn from cadavers, you know, real live cadavers, or not live, from cadavers, than just pictures and drawings on the computer or in the simulated computers or pictures in a book, and how getting the experience of what it feels like to cut through flesh and muscle and bone, you know, all of that, how helpful that is to somebody learning medical field and also forensic research and all of that. Totally fascinating. I know that's a little weird, but, you know, a little morbid, but I found it to be extremely fascinating. She talked about all kinds of things, from case studies, how she's helped identify bones and missing persons, and there's also 2 missing person cases that they were still trying to work on that she's been involved in. This particular person, Sue Black, is in the UK, but it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then I followed that up by reading Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers by Mary Roach. Gave that one 5 stars as well. This is basically the same type of book, except for it is a nonfiction book written by a reporter or a researcher. She was never involved in cadaver life as far as this, you know, actually being involved in that field. She's a reporter or a writer. And it was fascinating. She's U.S. based, so the things that she talks about are places in the U.S., but she talks about the same kind of things. And again, it just left me wanting to donate my body to science, so people can learn from me. So check those 2 out if those are kinds of things that you're fascinated by. If you're familiar with Caitlin Daugherty, she's the mortician that has the YouTube channel. You will be fascinated by this if that's something that you are fascinated by. Then I read I Wish You All the Best by Mason Devers. I gave this one 4 stars. This follows a high school student who comes out to their parents their senior year of high school in January, right after Christmas break. It's kick them out. They're left homeless, without any money, without any options, without a cell phone, and so what happens is they end up calling their sister, who they haven't had any contact with in 10 years, because she left the house going to college and has never looked back, got into a huge fight with their parents. Clearly their parents aren't all that great of people. So she goes and picks them up, and she's like, "You're living with us now, me and my husband, you're gonna live here." And they enrolled them in school, and it follows their process of becoming who they're supposed to be. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that, because I thought it was well told. I felt horrible for them. I felt anger towards their parents. I felt love for their sister and friends, and their parents are trash. Their parents are trash. But the process through it, and getting from point A to point B in this story, the journey we take, I just really thought it was well done and would be very helpful to anybody dealing with toxic family members, especially parents, and also someone that is in a position where they have to come out to, you know, because of their sexuality or their gender or non-gender. The next book I read was also an audiobook that I listened to, and it's a nonfiction book, memoir called He Wanted the Moon by Mimi Baird. I gave this book 4 stars, and the reason I gave it 4 stars is because I don't feel it was as accessible as it could have been. The book starts off with a little introduction by Mimi Baird, kind of about what the book is and who and what is going to, how the book is going to progress, and then it immediately then goes into her father's story, written by her father, when he was in a mental institution going through a manic phase. And it's hard to follow. It's his memoir of that time, but it's really hard to follow because he is in a manic phase and it's just all over the place. But so Perry Baird, Dr. Perry Baird was a dermatologist in Massachusetts, and he obviously was a sufferer of manic depression back in the early 1900s, I think it was about 1960, and he actually was trying to figure out a way to help people with manic depression. He was one of the only ones at the time who thought that it was a metabolic trigger or process in the body instead of just being crazy. And you know, back then you were possessed by the demons or whatever. You know, they didn't have a strong knowledge base on what mental illness was or how to deal with it and what caused it. They, you know, the methods that they used back then in the Westboro Mental Institution were horrific. You know, basically waterboarding and physical restraint and beatings and just all kinds of stuff, all of which or none of which work. He did end up escaping from the mental institution, and it kind of talks about, he goes and talks about that, and he ends up, his family, his parents are in Dallas, and he ends up there, and then he gets taken back, he gets captured, taken back to Westboro, and then they finally get him out. And he is one of the first people in the United States that has a lobotomy. You know, it was back that time when it was really new. Maybe not the first person, but it was that time frame when they were first doing lobotomies. And he ultimately died a few years later from he drowned. They think he had kind of a stroke or a seizure. He had a seizure as a result of that and drowned in the tub. So after Mimi Baird gets these documents from her uncle of his story, his book, because Dr. Perry Baird wanted to publish this book about his experience with manic depression, she then goes and starts to trying to learn about her father, because when he was put into Westboro, she was 9 years old, and her mom ended up divorcing her father while he was in the mental institution and getting remarried, and he wasn't something that they were allowed to talk about. So she didn't know a lot about him, just the few memories that she had. And her sister, her younger sister, knew nothing about him. You know, she didn't remember him at all. So what Mimi did then was she started to reach out to all the different medical establishments, gathering all of his medical records, going to the medical research libraries and pulling, because they keep all the letters and correspondence from their doctors and stuff, the major ones that had major medical research breakthroughs. And so she was pulling those, and she learned so much, including that he had a paper published connecting cats. He was studying cats and injecting them with blood from people with manic depression, and then people with without the bipolar disorder. And he kind of seeing how they act and reacted, or you know, how it affected them. And that's where he made the biological metabolic connection there. If you have anybody in your family that has manic depression, bipolar disorder, or any other mental illness, I think you would find this book a little bit fascinating. I found the book fascinating because I am diagnosed bipolar, and also Mimi Baird, Dr. Perry Baird, they are related to me in some way. I haven't figured it out yet, but Baird is my maiden name, and obviously I'm from Arkansas, and Dr. Perry Baird's father was born, even though they had relocated to Dallas, he was born here in Arkansas as well. So I know he's related. I just have to figure out the connection. But we would be a distant cousin. And there are some new medical research, scientists are researching that think that mental illnesses such as bipolar and depression are genetic. If you have that in your genetic history, then you are more likely to have that as well. And since it comes down through the male line of your family history, and then that's the line that it is on my side. It's through my paternal grandfather's side. Anyway, so I found it extremely interesting and want to know more, and so I'm going to be doing a little bit more research on my ancestry and figure out exactly how I'm related to Dr. Perry Baird and all that. But like I said, I think that the book itself was not as accessible as it could have been as far as language used and the way it was told. So that's why it got 4 stars. But I was fascinated. If you're into mental health, bipolar, if those are things that you enjoy learning about, then this might be a good memoir for you. So the final book that I read this month was An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I gave it 4 stars, and again, it was because of the way it was written, not what it contained. There was a lot of times that I was listening to this audiobook, and I was like, you just talked about that. You know, it didn't flow. It jumped around in different parts, and it repeated the same thing quite a bit, especially in the beginning. There was a lot of information in there that I knew because I knew that our history of what happened with the Indians and the settlers was revisionary, and it was not the accurate telling of it, but there were things that I learned that I was like, whoa, that's new. For example, our Constitution and the way our government was formed was pretty much taken from the Indians. They had a tribunal that they came together every so often with different representatives of the tribes as one, and kind of made kind of the law of the land. They resolved disputes that way. They resolved just kind of how our government works now. This is exactly what they do. What this tribunal did. They had one person in charge of it, and they all came together with representatives of the other tribes in the area. And I didn't know that. That was new to me. And also the scalping, the white people started that. It wasn't the Indians that were doing the scalping. It was the white people. They were paid money by the U.S. government. The colonizers, what they called the settlers, and the rangers were paid money for every scalp they turned in to the government. The government paid them. Men, women, and children had separate prices for their scalps. It wasn't the Indians scalping the white people. I'm horrified. As a white person, I'm horrified. I do have descendants, I do have, American Indian blood in me. Cherokee and Choctaw, that's the people, that's the I can't talk. Those are the indigenous tribes in my area. And now I'm going, well, hell, was my ancestor a settler that tricked them into letting them marry an indigenous woman? Was it legit? Was it coerced in any way? I'm horrified. I'm horrified by this. If you want to be horrified by the way the white people treated the American Indians, not even necessarily the white people, the Spaniards weren't any better, and the French people weren't any better either. But the colonizers from European descent were the worst. Those were horrific. And I'm just appalled, and I'm saddened, and I am embarrassed, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know I didn't personally have anything to do with that, but maybe my ancestors were pretty shitty. And I have a lot of remorse from that and a lot of guilt from that. It talks about restitution and giving them land back, and you know, paying them money for their land, but how do you ever make amends for that, for what we did? Okay, that's a whole different video and discussion. So that book was very eye-opening, very, I don't have any words. I don't have any words for it. But if you want to learn more about the actual history of the way the United States was formed and how we got our land by stealing it and murdering the people on it, then read that book. And I hope you're just as appalled by our country's history as I am. So, on that lovely, heartfelt note, let's talk about my goals and what I accomplished. My owned TBR, I started with 278 books, and I did read 5 of my own books off of this shelf. So I read these 4 books I already owned going into 2020, and then one of my special project secret TBR books, so that would make 5. And so I'm right on track there. Going into February, that means I will have 273 unread books that I started 2020 with. My Goodreads goal was 100 books. For 2020, that works out to 8.3 books a month, or roughly, you know, somewhere between 8 and 9 books. I read 13, right? 13 in the month of January, so I colored in my nice 13 little books there. The next one was Book Riot. We started out the month of January with 24 prompts that were not complete because it was the first of the month. I read 4 books that completed prompts from this Book Riot Read Harder challenge. The first one is prompt number 11. Read a debut novel by a queer author, and for that one I read I Wish You All the Best by Mason Devers. The next one completed on the list is number 13, which is to read a book about a cuisine you've never tried before, and for that one I read Buttermilk Graffiti by Edward Lee. Then the next one is prompt number 19, which is to read a book by or about a refugee, and for that one I'm using Refugee by Alan Gratz. And then the final prompt that I completed for this month is number 24. Read a book by a Native, First Nations, or Indigenous author. And for that one, obviously, I read The Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Next up, we have the Pop Sugar Challenge, and this one has 50 prompts on it, so that, again, averages it's 4.2 books a month for this, or somewhere between 4 and 5. I did complete 5 of these challenges this month. The first one is prompt number 16, which is to read a book by or about a woman in STEM, and for that one, that is All That Remains by Sue Black. The next prompt is number 18, a subject you know nothing about, and for that one I read Stiff by Mary Roach. The next one on the list is number 19, read a book that only has words on the cover. It has no images or graphics, and for that I read If by Nicholas Bourbaki. Then we have prompt number 32, read a book with a made-up language, and Dune by Frank Herbert. 35 is to read a book with a 3-word title, and for that I used Breakfast with Buddha by Roland Morello. And that's it. So I am doing exceptionally well. I have exceeded my expectations in where I'm at with my challenges, and so I'm excited to move into February. So with that said, I hope that you enjoyed this wrap up. I hope you learned a little bit about some books that you maybe didn't know anything about before, or a little bit about some books that have been on your TBR for a while or on your radar. Let me know in the comments below if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, or if they are books that are on your TBR and if you're planning on picking them up pretty soon. So come check back with me next month at the end of February when we talk about the February books that I read, what I thought of them, and where I'm at with on my challenges. Be sure and head on over there and give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video. If you didn't, hit that thumbs down button. That's perfectly okay with me. And also be sure and hit that big red subscribe button while you're over there so you know when I post new videos, so you can come back and see what I'm up to over here on Inklings. And until next month, I will talk to you later.